Here's a quick
Quick
TikTok
history
breakdown
lesson.
on the Korean War. Yeah, here.
Because there's a man mad in my comments saying I don't understand Korean history because according to him, there's no connection between the Japanese colonization of Korea and the pro-democracy student protests that followed for decades after. The Japanese colonization of Korea ended in 1945 after 35 years because they lost in World War II, and afterwards, Korea didn't really have a central government of their own. And the US and USSR came in and divided the peninsula at the 38th parallel. This was supposed to be temporary, but we know what happened there. Mind you, this is a line drawn by these external countries without consulting the Koreans. Also, unsurprisingly, instead of letting the Koreans hold their own elections and choose their own unified government, the US instead propped up a right-wing authoritarian regime with Lee Seung-man at its helm, aka a US puppet. Why? Because at this time, majority of Koreans supported socialism, which obviously didn't fit the mold for the US wants to spread capitalism globally. Obviously, the public backlash was immense as it pretty much solidified the division of the country into two. And there were protests all across the south, with the most significant in Jeju Island, now known as Jeju Uprising. Up to 30,000 Jeju Islanders were killed, which was 10% of the entire population by the US-backed South Korean government and also the US military itself. To give a little perspective of how the government was, it was literally illegal for South Koreans to even mention the Jeju Uprising, and it was punishable by torture if they did. Shortly after, the Korean War broke out, which was, if you think about it, partly caused by the actions of the US, which is ironic because for the longest time growing up, I thought that the United States were some type of heroes coming in to save the poor South Koreans, because that's how they wrote about it in our textbooks. Like, they really portrayed MacArthur as this courageous, intelligent, empathetic war general.
And definitely not like an insane racist who wanted to fucking nuke every Asian country and specifically kept begging for it over and over again.
But he killed 20% of the North Korean population. He wanted to use nuclear weapons against them. And even when ceasefire discussions were happening, he's
like, please, bro, please, like, let me get one fucking nuke off. Let me get one off, bro. Let me get one off. We did it to the Japans. Please, bro. China. Let me nuke China. Let me nuke Korea. Come on, bro. Let me nuke one of these motherfucking countries, please. Please, as a treat. Come on. They're all Chinese anyway. Okay? They're all Japanese at that time. I guess no, at that point, it's just like, at this point, they're now officially like, anyone who's a communist is my major enemy. So he's like, please. They're all Chinese. They're all different Chinese variants. Let me kill them.
To bomb them instead. And the US literally had to remove him. I know he was also the one that recommended Shiro Ishii and other members of Unit 731 be granted immunity in exchange for data, if that says anything.
By the way, the data that she's speaking of was specifically utilized, is talking about chemical weapons that were used in Korea. That is the reason why they were granted immunity in exchange for data. Data being bioweapons. Those biological weapons were used in Korea.
731 be granted immunity in exchange for data, if that says anything. Okay, and then after the Korean War ended, the right-wing authoritarian regime was still standing strong, and Lee Seung-man won his fourth term as president, and his pick for VP also won following a most likely rigged election. This led to large student protests called the April Revolution, where up to 200 students were killed. Following Lee Seung-man, majority of the Korean presidents that followed after were also military dictators, because once that system is set in place, it's hard to change. Park Chung-hee seized power with a military coup in 1961, where he served as a military dictator for almost...
Why hasn't China pressured North Korea to increase the standard of living? North Korea has increased the standard of living. People think North Korean standard of living is like resembling the 90s when there was massive famine and like they lost their most significant partner, the USSR. North Korean standards of living, even in the immediate aftermath of the Korean War, which literally was genocide, was significantly better than South Korean standards of living. South Korea kind of lapped North Korea and even Japan, I would say, since they changed their military dictatorship structure into the chaebol structure that you know South Korea as, and they blew the fuck up. I mean, obviously they have like massive companies and very successful industries in the arts field as well, but that wasn't what it was like at all for the longest time. For the longest time, North Korea was doing pretty good. And then obviously 90s, mass famine, no allies, sanctions regime, DPRK is cooked at that point. Since then, they've been able to uplift the material conditions of all North Koreans, but like it's still not great, but they're definitely doing better than the 90s.
almost 18
At the
years.
time of the Vietnam War, Saigon had a higher standard of living than South Korea, but military countries were recruited to fight in Vietnam. That's why their GDP blew up.
Seized power with the coup d'etat of December 12th in 1979, which I highly recommend this movie. It's literally crazy bonkers. It talks about how it happened. And he also led the coup d'etat of May 17th in 1980, where he declared martial law across the entire country. So universities were shut down, any type of political activity banned. He controlled the press, which led to more student protests, especially the Gwangju massacre, where up to 2,300 people were killed. Also, I forgot to mention this, but the South Korean military was under U.S. command at the time, and it was the Carter administration that gave the green light to Chun Doo-hwan to take over Gwangju with military force. AKA, history is all connected and it's all a trickle-down effect from one incident to the next. And to the man who called me dumb and said I was stupid for saying the impacts of colonialism ultimately led to pro-democracy protests, I hope this helps.
That was great. North Korea, like most nations, had rival factions between reformers and hardliners, army and intelligence, and so on. There's so much liberal propaganda from the Anglosphere that people even in this chat fail to think critically. La, 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 no DMCA, la, la, la.